All right. Good evening, you guys. Come on in. Come on in. Have an amazing show. Come on in. Come on in. Grab your loved ones. Grab your brothers. Grab your uncles. Grab your daddies, your husbands. Okay, your cousin. And come on in the room. We have a wonderful episode for you guys tonight. Okay, talking about men, trauma, and mental health. So come on in, come on in, come on in. Let me know you're here. Drop in the comments that you're here so we can shout you out. Hey, Key. Good evening. Come on in. Come on in, you guys. This is an episode. Hey, show, join the drum, go. Thank you for joining. Come on in. This is an episode you don't want to miss. Okay? Because there's a lot going on and we need to talk about it. And we have a special guest tonight that's going to help us process some of this stuff that's happening, especially to our men. So come on in, come on in. I don't want to wait too long because I just want to let this brother loose. And I'm sure we're going to have questions for him. And I'm so excited about the dialogue that, hey, Key, I'm so excited about the dialogue. So I'm going to give 2 more minutes and we got not even, but we're going to get started. Drop in the comments that you're here so I can shout you out. So glad you guys are joining in. Again, share this episode, especially to your crazy family members. Share it on their page, okay? And tell them hashtag healing is the only agenda. We can't afford to be out here looking crazy in these streets anymore, okay? Folks just acting all the way up because of unresolved trauma. Healing is the only agenda. This is what Tisa's Rants and Musings is really all about. So share it. Hey, good evening, Teresa. Good to see you on with us again. Thank you. Thank you. Come on in. Come on in. I don't want to wait too long because I know the conversation is going to get juicy and then we're going to end up going over. And I don't want us to go over. Okay, so come on in. Come on in. Waiting for just a few that I know said they will be on for sure. So drop in the comments and let me know that you're here so I can feel like I waited a little bit for you and we can get started. I'm so excited. I'm so excited. It's going to be so good. Okay. All right. I got 903. I can't wait. Whoever isn't in just isn't in. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully they'll come in while we're talking. Welcome to another episode of Tisa's Rants and Musings. I am so super duper duper excited about tonight's episode. We are continuing with our men's emphasis because June is Men's Health Awareness Month. And because it's all about men in June, we have Father's Day weekend coming up. We have been focusing on men and health. We talked about just men and how COVID affected them, especially Black men more than anyone else, and what we need to do to support men getting taking preventive measures to keep their health going. We talked about end of life situations. What are the kind of conversations we need to have with our brothers, our husbands, our spouses to know what they might want to see happen, only because they tend to not go to the hospital unless something is happening. So that we know how to support them. But now we're going to really talk and focus tonight's episode on just men, trauma, and mental health. Kristen last month gave us a nice foundation on what trauma is all about and trying to understand it for ourselves in general. But with all that's going on in the world, with the seemingly invisible target that Black men specifically have on their bodies, and everything that's happening, it's all traumatic. We're suffering through community trauma and so many things that can be going on with men. So I wanted to invite a man on to talk about men and how they handle trauma and how trauma looks for them, which can be very different than how it might look for us as women, or me as a woman, I should say, and mental health and what that means and how do you kind of know when it's time to get some more additional help. So I have with me a young man. I was like, I don't want to, he's a grown man, okay, but he's young to me, okay. So he's a grown man. He's a social worker. I've been a social worker for over 12 years. He's been committed. He is committed to social justice. He's a well sought out speaker at universities, at conferences on racism and trauma. He oversees a mentoring and behavioral assistance program. He's a lecturer at Rutgers. He has a beautiful wife. Yes, ladies, he has a beautiful wife and two amazing sons. And his name is Michael Ajagbe. I hope I said that right. He will correct me if I'm wrong. And he's going to come on and share with us about this topic. So please help me welcome Michael to the show. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Tisa. How you doing?
I can't hear you. There you go. I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Can't complain.
Okay, so it seems like there's a delay because it seems like your mouth is moving before we hear you, but that's fine. We're going to keep moving and going for it anyway. And hopefully it'll catch up because sometimes this internet stuff is wacky.
Fine.
All right. So, okay. Oh, so many of you guys are on. So good to see you. All right, so let's get started. Michael, as I mentioned, as I said in my introduction, so much is happening that's traumatic already for Black men. Just being Black in America is traumatic, right? Let's just put that out there. I'm sure you would agree. It's just an experience of trauma in and of itself. But Kristen had talked to us also about something called ACEs, which was that adverse childhood experiences that can also be trauma on top of that. Yeah. So I think it's fair to say, you can correct me, that all of us, but also men, have been living with some level of trauma in their lives.
Absolutely.
Right. It's just what it is at this point. But help us understand how it can show up in men, because I think sometimes as women who are connected to men, we expect them to respond to trauma like we do. We expect their depression to look like ours. We expect them to experience it the way we do, but you guys don't. So help us understand just men trauma and all of this.
Absolutely. So for men, trauma looks a little bit different for men. When we think about, before I even jump into it, from a societal standpoint, men are not, taught to be able to share their emotions. We're not, that's not something, that's not the norm, that's not the cultural belief or expectation. And this is not just here in the United States of America. This is in different parts of the world. From a Latinx perspective, they have this machismo aspect. And, there's that. And, from, in countries in Africa as well, the same kind of goes the same way as well. But there's actually, there's a word called Alexithymia. Basically, that is a term used to describe a restriction of emotional expression. And this is caused by socialization. So when we think about it, little boys today are discouraged from expressing their emotion by family members, peers, teachers, coaches, role models. It varies. And this makes it difficult for men to be able to process the range of emotional reactions that occur after a traumatic event.
Okay, hold on. Spell that for me. What did you say it was?
Alexithymia, it's
IT.
Alexithymia.
Wow, I've never heard of that before. And you're saying what that is really all that you're talking about. That's the term for this restriction of
Yeah.
the expression of emotions that men
Yes.
are taught.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I just wanted to make sure we got the right term.
So pretty much, where men, young boys are trained to suck it up, and that's just how, from a societal standpoint, how men have been raised, and just in terms of being able to deal with their emotions. So they're taught to believe that a real man is strong enough to endure traumatic or difficult events. So to be emotionally impacted, um, is pretty much, it can lead to episodes of anger, hypersensitivity, anxiety, conflict in relationships, and addictions. So these are the things that can lead to unsatisfying and unfulfilled life. And all of these things can be avoided, with the right help.
Okay, so you said that all of this not being able to express yourself shows up in men as anger. You said addiction. You said hypersensitivity.
Yes, anxiety, conflict in relationships as well. And you see it all the time.
Wow. So okay, because I'm just trying to get it down so we can get
Sure.
that is what how it can show up in men. So when we see our young men being angry and we see them starting early on with addiction, right? Addiction to marijuana, addiction to alcohol, which seems to start younger and younger. Some of us are able to say, okay, they're trying to self medicate or they're dealing with something. But what I don't hear us talk a lot about is the others that you've just talked about, which is that hypersensitivity, that men also have anxiety. Like we don't hear it like that for men. We don't hear that that's a common reaction that a man living with trauma, unresolved trauma, can be experiencing, and then even conflict in relationships. I don't think we put that conflict in relationships and tie it necessarily to unresolved trauma or to a mental health issue. We just kind of just think that they just act in a particular way or they just don't know how to love. Women put it in terms that we might be missing what is really at the foundation of that. So help give me a look for what I think we know what anger looks like, right? We know what addiction looks like, but what does hypersensitivity look like?
Sure. So I can even break it down in terms of, you mentioned you mentioned unresolved trauma. So the best way to describe, to me, that I describe unresolved trauma is a covert depression, right? So it's all this trauma that's in a man's body and they don't talk about it. So what are they doing? They're carrying it around all the time. These emotional experiences often happens in their family life, and there's the reactivity aspect of it, hypersensitivity. What are you looking at? Like
Ah,
just being reactive,
right.
constantly. And you see this a lot with our young brothers. Just that reactivity piece. Just the mere look of somebody just looking at them, and you hear that all the time. What are you looking at? Is there a problem? Is there an issue? And that also comes along with community violence, and this whole notion of, I can't look weak. So
Wow.
we see this in this
Wow.
we see it in this form of explosion. Men will come in with presenting problems that might be like anger problems, domestic violence, substance abuse, or whatever the case might be, which is a problem within itself. But then as you get to talk to them, as you get to know the individual, you learn that there's this huge underbelly of trauma that they're not even aware of, or if they're not even ever talked about.
Wow, 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 wow. And again, we're seeing this. Most of us have seen this behavior in our communities from our loved ones, our husbands, our spouses, and we don't know what to term it. We don't know. And like you said, it might be unconscious for them as well. So then how do you start, or how do men start to understand, or what should trigger it to them to, or us to know when it's maybe a serious issue? Because again, like you said, they're not taught to really recognize it or to even deal with it. We haven't always been taught to put a name to it, or give it a voice outside of anger and addiction. But how do we know when it's time to get help? Like, how do you even begin to process that or have that dialogue?
I think, for some people, it looks different for each person. If it gets to the point where it is affecting your day-to-day life, then help is needed. Even for example, like certain symptoms can be a weakened immune system.
Yes.
I'll give you a perfect example, and I'll use myself as an example. With the recent things that's been happening in our country, most especially with George Floyd. Um, and unfortunately, you add the situation with COVID-19. That's another thing. So experiencing and seeing that video, or that altercation, or whatever word you want to
Murder.
use.
That murder,
Yes,
right.
if you seeing that, that within itself is traumatizing.
Right.
You know, so pretty much, I do not know George personally, but I was grieving through the whole process.
Right.
Grieving for when that incident happened for a couple of days, because while I saw his face, I was seeing my brother, I saw my father, I saw my
Yes.
cousins, I saw
Yes.
my friends, and most of all, I saw my sons. So I was in a state of rage and a state of grief at the same time. So I, like when I mentioned in terms of my immune system, because I just felt down, to the point that literally I was sick. And of course, you add in, COVID to it, you're thinking, oh my God, do I have it? Is that what's going on? But,
Right.
you know,
Right. Which
it's,
adds to anxiety.
yes, absolutely. Because and that's something that, as a Black male, that I have constantly in the back of my mind, and I'm constantly thinking about it. Thinking about my family, thinking about my son, thinking about my brothers, thinking about my friends. So even in regards to that, it's constantly being on edge. Whether it's driving and you're seeing a police officer behind you, or you're seeing a police officer, there's that hypervigilance, that hypersensitivity. Like, okay, something is about to go down, without even the fact that you did something wrong.
Yeah.
So that's how that plays a role.
Wow. And I think, and thank you for sharing how it impacted you, right? And David is also my brother. This is my big brother whom I love dearly. He's talking about how it's just draining, right? It's got to be draining. But my heart is bleeding, because to me, that's enough to have to deal with. But if you put into this unresolved trauma from childhood, right?
Yes,
Unresolved, trauma from your life prior to all of this, and then throw this in there, it seems overwhelming. It seems like a lot. And just back up for us, so that we can know, or remind us, what are some of those traumas that a man might experience or a young boy could experience? Because, like you said, men don't even know they might have experienced trauma, or have had a traumatic childhood event happen, because they're not told, or allowed to even realize that that was horrible, that was traumatic. What are some of those things that can be trauma in a boy's life?
sure. So I can give you an example that you can have. There could be situational trauma, which involves or can include maybe a car crash or a traumatic event such as witnessing abuse or murder. There's chronic trauma, which includes this is ongoing emotional, mental, and physical abuse. And it's incredibly common, especially for young boys. And then there's community violence as well that plays such a huge piece of it within the African American community. And when you're witnessing and you're exposed to something of this caliber on a day-to-day basis, weekly basis, and it's just ongoing, that takes a toll on your body. It takes a toll on your mind. It takes a toll on your psyche.
It feels daunting, right? But I know one of you have this saying about change happens when people just are given a direction to even know how to kind of get on that healing journey, right? And so, how do we help men heal? Right? How do we get them on this healing journey? How do we destigmatize this trauma? Right? How do we say to men, or what do you say to men to let them know that it's okay to express the hurt. It's okay to express the anger, the whatever you're feeling from that trauma, of course, in safe spaces, so that they can start to unpack it and then process it and move towards healing.
Sure. I think it's important for the men that are watching right now, who are listening, or even the significant others, is to help and understand and appreciate and see how trauma can be a normal part of a human being, and how it has a significant impact on us as humans. And it's also for us to be able to heal from. We can heal from trauma. That is one thing that I want people to know. Um, there are ways that we can become fuller, more rich human beings. And the way to do is by facing and talking about it. So what I want to highlight and say is, to heal, men need other men.
Wait, wait. I gotta get that down. To heal, men
Need other men.
wow.
I am my brother's keeper. I am
Wow.
my brother's keeper. You know
Are you
what?
guys writing this down? Are you guys taking notes out there? Because this is deep. And I'm sorry. Let me just interject here, because far too often, especially when we're dealing with men that may be dealing with addiction, anger, there's this aspect of isolation, right?
Yeah.
There's this aspect of withdrawing from community because they don't want anybody to know what they're doing or how they're living. And so there aren't any seemingly connections that seem like they can help. So oftentimes, as the significant other, or as the children, or the relative that's female, we see it, but we're also at the brunt of it, right? So we're getting it. We're getting the brunt of this trauma, unresolved trauma, but then we keep trying to heal. We keep trying to tell them what they need to do to heal, and we think it's part of our job to play therapist, to play mother, to play, and sometimes men rely on us so heavily for that. So what you're saying to me is just, to me, mind blowing, because you rarely hear that men need other men to heal. They don't need women. They don't need second mothers. They don't need another auntie in their life. They need men. Woo!
Yes. Because if you think about it, and I'll break it down so you can kind of get a glimpse into where I'm going with this. There's a special connection with men who share stories with other men. Prime example, for all men who are out there right now who are listening, when they go to their barbershops, when they go to their barbers, they're sharing conversations. They're engaging in conversations with their barber. Heck, they're having conversations with
Yes.
barbers that they wouldn't have with their wives or their girlfriends at home. And that is
It's true.
amazing within itself. I remembered when I was in school, when I was in grad school, I wrote a paper about this, about creating my own organization and what that organization would look like. It would focus on basically men who are missing in the lives of their children, for one reason or the other, whether they were incarcerated, whatever the case might be. And really, to start the healing process for that would be, I had the idea, the notion that I realized that, at different points when I was getting my haircut, that the stories that people would share, it's interesting that they're sharing this with their barber who's not a professional. But yet, because this is a connection that they have with this individual, but yet they're sharing. So what tends to happen is, because the barber is not a professional, he's not digging deep. So he's just at the surface of what's really there, So I came up with the notion of creating an organization where we would have a barbershop that would also be a way where we would have licensed clinicians or therapists be able to provide services as well, in conjunction with men getting their haircut. So whoever is out there right now listening, please go ahead, take that idea, run with it. The more run with it. I'm okay with that, because it's needed. Men get the pain from holding a lot of things in, but at different points, not everyone is ready to hear what we have to say and what they have to say. So we would need a professional to help. We would need good, trusted friends to help. What we know about what we know, or what we should know about healing, really involves three things. That one, people need to feel safe and be away from the source of that trauma. That's one thing, because if they don't feel safe, they would not be able to really engage. They would not be able to be vulnerable and be able to engage and have those difficult discussions. Um, people need to know how to cope with at least some of the pain, and this is where the professionals will really come in, and being able to really be a form of guide for them. We need to be able to express our words, whether it's written, spoken, or whether it's even through song, you know, breathing, mindfulness, spirituality. For all of us, for a lot of us who are watching right now, we can, spirituality is very, very important for us, especially in the Black communities. So, but one thing that I want to mention is that should not be our sole focus. That should not be our main focus, because a lot of the times we do this all the time, you know, when it comes to therapy, and we know that there's a stigma associated with it. People just feel that, I'll pray it away, and that will be it, and it's just like, no, it's more than that. There's a piece, there's something that God needs to do, and there's something that you need to do as well. So imagine right now, I'm praying to God, please, I need to get this job, I need the job, I need a job, things are hard, things are difficult. Okay, God is going to do that part, and God is going to send a helper your way, or is going to intervene. But before God intervenes, you need to do something. And what's that you need to do? How about you fill out an application? If you don't fill out that application, then there's no way you're going to get those phone calls. There's no way somebody's going to call you and say, hey, Mr. So-and-so, we saw your application, we looked at your resume, we would like to call you in for an interview. So that's the way that works. And I feel like a lot of the times we get stuck on the spirituality aspect of it, on the religious aspect of it. And a lot of us are hurting from this. A lot of us are dying because of this. And it's not just, I'm not saying spirituality is not important. It is definitely important, but it's not just spirituality alone. And that is one of the big, big concerns right now that I personally think is really affecting us in our communities when it comes to getting the necessary help that is needed.
I mean, that you have said so much in just that piece alone about how we look at faith, right? And how we look at faith and healing in a lot of our in our community, and it's something my pastor always preaches and teaches about, which is that you have to participate in your own healing, right? Oftentimes, God still requires you to do something. So it's like that example you gave. You can't just pray and expect a job to land in your lap all the time. Sometimes you have to actually go out there, fill out the application, go to the interview. You're going to have to do something. But then you said something before that about just men needing safe spaces. And I can't help but to connect the two, right? That I have found oftentimes so many men not find our spaces at church to even be safe enough for them to be able to share. It's interesting that a secular location like a barbershop, where you go maybe once every 2 weeks with someone who may or may not be a believer, a male can feel more comfortable talking to him about what he's going through than some of the same people that they sit with at church a couple of times a week, or see them every Sunday, been going to the same church, but somehow it just doesn't feel like a safe space for them. And so somebody else commented that their church has, and I'll show her comment. Valina said how her church has had this conversation several times, but attendance was very low every time. So help us understand, if men need safe spaces, and for the Black community, most of the more communal spaces we do have is the barbershop, is the church, is very local places. How do we make the church a safe space? What can men's ministry do? Because every church got a men's ministry,
Right.
but are they able to feel safe where they can share some of these things, and get healed?
I mean, the question is, does it have to be in the church? It can be organized by the men's ministry, but it doesn't have to be in the church.
I like it.
You know, so
It's walls.
it doesn't, because I'll tell you exactly why, and I'll be blunt. We know in the church, gossip takes place in the church constantly, all the time. So how can that place be a safe place to talk about whether it's a sexual abuse, or sexual assault, or physical abuse? How can I feel safe to engage in a conversation in a place where I know that the walls are so thin, right?
Wow.
So that's the reason why the attendance might be low. Not to say you can't have a support group. You can have a support group. You can have this conversation, this discussion that we're having, but to dig deep, I would refrain from having it in the church, if possible. But if people feel comfortable in having it in the church, then go ahead. But what's going to happen is you're going to have low attendance. You're going to have people thinking, I'm being judged. This is the house of the Lord. I'm coming in, and now I'm talking about my innermost thoughts, secrets that I've been holding on to, that I've been hugging onto for years, 20, 15, 30 years. That's difficult.
Wow.
That's
Especially
difficult.
if you weren't socialized to even talk about your feelings, period.
Precisely.
So if you haven't been raised to talk about it, you haven't been, and so you're now trying to broach even the idea of talking about it. The last place you want to talk about is someplace where you might feel judged for it, and oftentimes that's how people feel in the church. And to Cheryl's point, so much of the church has really just been to pray, try to pray it away, or that if you had more faith, you wouldn't have this addiction. If you were just more obedient, you wouldn't have this problem. So we tend to put on top of men a shame factor, and so coming to church, they feel even more shame that they're not living this so-called life, and then there's no space to really have that conversation. And so it just seems like there's no place for them to really turn to. But you just told us men need men to heal.
Yeah.
So here you have this location where all these men are gathered, and those men don't feel safe enough to help another man heal.
Yeah.
I think it's a lost, I feel like it's a lost opportunity.
That's where the notion of, having either a therapist or having good trusted friends.
Yes.
This is where trust comes into play. Somebody just put, men are not going to tell a bunch of men in the church about their issues because some of them would tell their wives or other brothers. She's absolutely right. He's absolutely correct. So
and we know this to be true.
That's why I made the statement that, does it have to be in the church? It doesn't have to be in church. And this is not something that should be forced. This is something that comes naturally. I mentioned, I used the barber as an example. Nobody's getting their hair cut and the barber is forcing them to tell me what like, it's not forced. It's a conversation. It flows.
Right.
And that's the same way that this happens. Again, I'm going up to the other statement that Cheryl made, that we've been taught to just pray it away. Like, even that notion, it's more than that. It's more than just praying it away. Even in the Bible, in the book of James, chapter 5, verse 16, it says, "Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another, that you may be healed."
Yes, because
that you may be healed.
Right.
So it's more than that. We need one another. We do. That's just the bottom line. This is what the word is within itself is saying. So we have to find a way, and I think it's little by little, but it's so hard to do that when we've been programmed for years not to do what it is that we're talking about right now, to be able to engage and to be able to talk. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It's not something that's going to happen in 3 months. It's little by little. We're taking off that layer. We're breaking down that wall. We all have our guards up. So it's not something that gets done right away. So it's a process. It's a process.
It is a process. But maybe I'm feeling, I think for me, I feel like this COVID-19 pandemic, and I should say it is a process, but I'm typing pretty fast. This COVID-19 pandemic, then this heightened awareness, let's call it a heightened awareness of the pandemic of racism, systemic racism and police brutality. I feel like the confluence of all of this has made my sense of urgency for us to get in this process even stronger, right? Because I feel like we can't afford it. Like you talked about how the community trauma impacted your body, right? So how many of our men have been dealing and living with unresolved trauma that helped to create these underlying health issues that then, they went to the hospital with COVID and never came out.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just men that had significant health issues that left here. It just seemed like it hit our men so hard that it was wiping. I know young, old, skinny, heavy, underlying conditions, no underlying conditions. And Dr. Christina last week talked about how all of that had happened. So I just want us to get this sense of urgency so that we can understand ways for us to do just what you were talking about earlier, participate in our own healing. So, okay, it's a process. How do we start though? How do men get on track? What's the first step they can take to say, okay, I know I'm angry. I'm over here, taking out things on my wife and my children. I might be smoking too much, drinking too much, doing too much porn. I'm recognizing that I'm not okay. I'm hypersensitive. What's the first thing once they start coming to this awareness? Or maybe that I'm depressed. My drive for doing things is just done. I'm just, like you said, down. Perhaps I'm just down. What is the first step a man can do when he realizes that I'm not in a healthy space?
What can they do? So I think if it's starting to get in a way where it is affecting you physically, it is affecting you emotionally, you can't function. Some people, for some folks, they might like to say they're having a midlife crisis, or they feel like they're not they're not moving forward in their life with anything, and it's always the same thing, but it just looks different. The situation might look different, but then it's like the question is, whatever it is that you're doing, that you've always been doing, since it hasn't been working, what else is there to do? So that means you, and this is where the work really has to come. Like, okay, I've been keeping to myself. I've been constantly angry. I've been taking it out on my wife. I've been taking it out all on my children. Then it's not working. So something needs to look different. So, and that's always the question that needs to be asked. And a lot of the times people don't realize that they've just been doing the same thing over and over again. The story might look different, the situation might look different, but it's still
The
the
woman is different. Just switch women because you don't want to deal with your issue, so you just move on.
The issue comes again. It comes again.
Right.
In a form of support. So like men may be more likely to respond to goal-oriented tasks. So for our females, our mothers, our sisters that are in here, it's, to me, I always think, always ask a specific question in regards to what's needed, but keep in mind that they may feel more supported by a specific task. Like, let's figure out a time when we can go to gym. Let's figure out a time when we can go to therapy, go see friends, have a more relaxing activity together, rather than pushing them to express themselves emotionally, because that's what with our females tend to do. And this is coming from a place of love because they care so much. But when you're pushing them to express themselves emotionally, they're not ready to do so. So it becomes, you see the rage, you see the anger, you see the, I think you just need to shut up and leave me alone. Or you hear you're nagging right now. I don't want to hear it. So if it's more goal oriented, I think it would look a little bit different. I know for couples, they use a journal as a way to write about what is coming up for their male partner emotionally. Some men have reported, being more comfortable with writing about their emotions rather than discussing. So that's also something to put into consideration,
Yeah. So kind of writing, journaling can help them, but then also seeking a therapist.
Yes, absolutely. And one thing that I want to mention is, instead of saying, and we see it all the, we hear it all the time and we see it all the time. So if your significant other is struggling, but obviously we can't tell because all we're seeing is just the negative aspect, the anger, you know, and all the other things that comes along with it. So instead of saying what's wrong with you, I think the question should be switched a little bit, and we should be asking what happened to you. Because once we say that, and we're hearing that constantly, it starts to change certain things and we start to kind of do a little self-reflecting, because that question, what happened to you, is kind of more focusing on really what right now you're showing all this rage, you're showing all this anger, but really what's really underneath all of it, because that's the key point.
Okay. Since you took it there, right? If I'm the significant other, or I'm the brother, I'm the sister to the brother, whatever, and I ask that what's wrong, I switch from what's wrong with you and I ask what happened to you. Give us a few tips on how we're supposed to handle the response. Because I think sometimes we, as the supporting partners, don't even know how to always handle what might come back, right? So if we say what's happened to you, and we've never been pulled over by a cop before just because we're a black man. Like we've never may have never experienced those same things. When they share what actually might have happened, um, how should we handle it? What are some tips for us to handle the response so we don't mismanage the moment?
Yeah, I mean, the whole purpose of that is not to get a direct answer right away. You're planting a seed. That's
Oh, wait,
that's what you.
wait, wait. Wait a minute. Because I'm looking for an answer. I'm like, I need to know what happened. Okay, because you come home screaming and holler. I need to know what happened. So you're saying that I'm not, the whole goal of asking what happened is not for me to get an answer to make me feel like I understand now why you're upset.
Yes,
It's really for me to plant a seed for you to start self-reflecting on your behavior.
yes, absolutely.
That's subtle,
Because
hey, undercover therapy stuff right there. Like
be-
I wouldn't have thought. Like I said, ladies, who knew, right? Who knew that we weren't supposed to wait for this answer? We were
because
supposed to just allow the question to be processed.
right,
That's
because if we think about it, and that question, what's wrong with you? If you think about it, for the most part, from the significant other, it's coming out of a place of frustration, right? So it's the husband, the boyfriend, the brother is doing something right now, and it whatever behavior that they're exhibiting is not connecting, it's not in tune or connected with the trauma that they've endured in the past. But this is a recurring behavior. This is something that's continuing to happen on a day-to-day, monthly, weekly basis. So I think what happens is we hear the what's wrong with you, just get yourself together, and that's the part that I'm explaining. Instead of saying what's wrong with you, then the question should really be switched around. And in saying that, like I said, you're not going to get an answer.
Well,
That's you're not
Dave is giving us his version of an answer, which is we what you mean what happened to me.
right. So
Right.
it's not, and this is where the reflection comes in. So when they, it's like, think about it, right? I'll give you a perfect example. Everybody in here, when we grew up, we were bothered by the fact that our parents were playing their old school music, and they would blast it, whether it's every Sunday, and it's constantly playing. Mind you, we claimed that we didn't like this music, but guess what? We find ourselves singing those songs later on. Heck, 20, 30 years later, we're playing those songs ourselves. Why is that? That's why I made the statement that in terms of planting the seed, right? Because it's not something that you expected or you're expecting to have a response to, or you want them to figure out right away. Going to therapy is a process. It's not something that happens in a year, 2 years. It's a process. It takes time. So that's the whole purpose of, as opposed to just saying what's wrong with you and you become reactive to the behavior, you're coming from a empathetic standpoint, a understanding standpoint that, I'm still here, but really just try to make the connection. And eventually, if they're seeking the help that they're supposed to, that they should seek, things will start to connect and make sense eventually with time.
Yeah, that's the whole thing is with time. And I think because just from my experience, you don't always feel like you have that time because if you're at the brunt end of the traumatic responses, then for the family, it can feel like I need you to figure out what's wrong with you and get right like tomorrow because I can't keep getting the brunt of this. But I like what you're saying that part of being in it is understanding that this is going to be hard work. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take time. It could take years for a man to really be able, for anyone to be able to process the trauma that they have been through. But then if we add on top of it, all of this community trauma, all of this trauma from racism and all of this that Black men are dealing with, it's an uphill battle.
Yes.
It's an uphill battle. But because I believe, and we are believers, that I do think this is where the prayer part can help, right? We serve a God that can expedite
Absolutely.
things. We serve
Absolutely.
a God that can do exceedingly and abundantly above all that we could ask or think. So he can bless the works of our hands, right? So when we get on this healing journey, when we get on the track to be healed, God can multiply our efforts in ways we would not have
Yes.
we
Yes.
recognize. So yes, it's hard. It takes time, but when God is in the midst of it, He knows how to get in there and help make the crooked places straight, right? And
Yes.
help us come to spaces where we can be in this journey together. And so, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you've come on to get at least even give that alone. What you told was worth the night, okay? But I'm so grateful because I think we have been missing each other, and it's obvious, right? That women are right here with men in their trauma, but we don't always know how to support them on their healing. And oftentimes, we don't necessarily feel like we have the time to support them on their healing. We're trying to do our own healing, right?
Yes.
And so you have two people with unresolved trauma coming together and playing out their traumatic reactions on each other, and nobody's understanding it. And then you have this breakdown of the family unit, or you have something like a simple virus come through and wipe out uh, the elders of us, or even just some of our young men. So I think this is such a great conversation to have had. So I appreciate you coming on. Kristen feels like you need to start a Zoom group for men. Okay, that um, and I just think that just you by you coming on, allowing us to have this dialogue is going to help other people. You guys, I need you to share this all over your page. I need you to share it. Thank you for those of you who were tagging people to be on, because we need to be on this healing journey. We can't afford it like we used to. Years ago, and Michael, you tell me if I'm wrong, but years ago you could go pretty much go through your whole life and not deal with it. Your family just deal with it. They
Yeah.
just consider you a grumpy, ornery old man, and they lived with you being mean or angry all the time, and you
Yeah.
die like that,
Yeah.
right? You go be 80 years old and die that same old mean, grumpy man.
Yeah.
But now, in the world that we're living in now, we just feel like we can't really even. You can't count on making it to 80 to be healed, right? You just don't know what this world is about. So, getting on that healing journey, you told us about writing, you told us about journaling, you told us about men needing to heal men and men needing safe spaces. So, I don't know what else would you like to leave us with some parting words, because you've given us so much. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So, my last words or last statement that I like to add or say is just that really the process of healing itself, it pulls us into the present, and it makes us feel more alive, makes us feel grateful. You know, we are more available to the people we love, and you're more available to yourself. So draw from those things, draw from your strengths, share your strengths with other people, because at the end of the day, good men face trauma and good men heal. That's it.
Oh, that's so awesome. Oh my gosh. Okay, wait. I gotta get that up there though. That was so awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You have blessed our lives. I think, and let me just scan the audience. You guys tell me if you think we need maybe Michael to come back a little later. We won't say when, but there's definitely room for a part two. Anybody feel a part two in their spirit? I think I feel a part two in my spirit. Okay, Michael, we would definitely want to have you join us again at some point to just talk more to us about trauma, men, and even getting more into racism, which we weren't able to delve into that much on this conversation. But I think, yes, they're saying you got to come back, come back. People want you back, Michael. Yay. So we have this conversation. Thank you for sharing with us. You know, we have just a couple of more minutes. Again, please share this with people. Let them know that healing is available. Healing is available to all of us, but especially for our men, that they don't have to keep walking around feeling like they're alone, broken, and not in healthy spaces. Everyone is saying they enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Michael. You guys, you can always um, connect with me on Instagram, on YouTube. Please go to my YouTube page, hashtag healing is the only agenda, and subscribe. You can send people to the Facebook page. You can send them to my Facebook. Roger said you can send them to my Facebook page, Tisa Joining Dance Ministries. Also on Instagram, so that they can see this. I load them up also on my website, which is tjnanceministries.com. Listen, it's all about getting out the information so people can get on the track towards healing. Thank you again, Michael. All of
Thank
you
you for having me.
joining in. I appreciate you guys in the audience. And till next week, take care.
Take care. Bye.